He had everything a man could ever want. A penthouse that touched the clouds, cars that purred like caged lions, a name that made rooms go quiet when he walked in. But on the night that should have been the greatest of his life, surrounded by people who called him a genius, a visionary, a king, he sat completely, devastatingly alone. And only then did he remember her. The quiet woman he had passed by 1,000 times without truly seeing. The woman who had loved him in a way he didn't have the wisdom to recognize. The woman who was, by then, already gone. This is the story of Elias Fontaine. And I want you to listen carefully, because somewhere in this story, you may just find yourself. Elias Fontaine was not born into wealth. That is the first thing you need to understand about him, because it explains everything that came after. He grew up in a small apartment above a laundromat in a city that had no patience for dreamers. His mother worked 2 jobs, and sometimes 3. His father left when Elias was 7, not with a dramatic goodbye, not with tears or apologies, just with a Tuesday morning disappearance, like a coat that slips off a hook and is never noticed until winter comes. Elias wore that absence every single day of his life, without ever admitting it. By the time he was 12, he had decided one thing with a certainty that bordered on fury. He would never be poor again. He would never feel invisible again. He would never, ever, be left behind again. So he worked. He studied. He scraped. He clawed his way through a state university on a partial scholarship and 3 part-time jobs, sleeping 4 hours a night for years. And when he was 26, he launched a small logistics software company out of a studio apartment with a leaky ceiling and a second-hand desk. By 30, that company was valued at $40 million. By 35, he was a name on the cover of business magazines. By 40, Elias Fontaine was worth, by conservative estimates, close to $300 million. He had done it. He had become everything he promised that 7-year-old boy he would become. But here is what no one tells you about becoming everything you promised yourself you would be. You can be so busy looking at the mountain you just climbed that you never notice who was standing beside you on the path. You can be so intoxicated by the view from the top that you forget, completely and catastrophically, what and who you left at the bottom. Elias had an office on the 42nd floor of a glass tower in the financial district. His assistant, a precise young man named Marcus, managed his calendar down to the minute. His social circle included senators, celebrities, and CEOs who laughed too loudly at his jokes and agreed with everything he said. He had a chef. He had a driver. He had a lifestyle coach who told him, 3 times a week, that he was exceptional. And he believed it. That is the thing about Elias Fontaine that would ultimately destroy him. Not his ambition, not his wealth, not even his arrogance. It was his absolute, unshakable belief that he had earned the right to be careless with people, that the ones who truly mattered would still be there whenever he decided to pay attention. That love, like loyalty, was something you could defer, something you could come back to, something that would wait. It would not wait. She would not wait. But we will get to that. Her name was Margaret O'Say, and she came into Elias's life so quietly, so without ceremony or announcement, that he almost missed her entirely. Almost. She had joined his company 8 years before the story I am about to tell you reaches its devastating end. She was hired as a junior financial analyst, a small role, an entry-level position, the kind that Elias himself would never have noticed if not for a single moment in a conference room when she raised her hand during a board presentation and gently, respectfully, pointed out a calculation error that would have cost the company $2.3 million. She hadn't been loud about it. She hadn't embarrassed anyone. She had simply said, quietly, "I think there may be a discrepancy on slide 14. Would it be all right if I walked through it?" And she had been right. Elias had looked at her that day with something close to curiosity, the way you look at a painting in a hallway that you've walked past dozens of times, and suddenly, for reasons you can't explain, it stops you. He had asked Marcus her name. He had said, casually, "Keep an eye on her." And then he had moved on to his next meeting, his next deal, his next conquest, and largely forgot she existed. But Margaret did not forget. She did not forget the way he had nodded in her direction after she spoke. She did not forget the slight warmth in his eyes, the momentary recognition. It was not infatuation, not immediately. It was something quieter, a sense that here, perhaps, was a man who could see people, a man behind the armor who might, if given the right conditions, let someone in. She was not wrong about what she sensed in him. She was only wrong about the timing, about whether he would find his way to that version of himself before it was too late. In the years that followed, Margaret rose steadily through the company. Her promotions were not given. They were earned, every one of them, through a consistency and a competence that made even Elias's most senior advisors take notice. She became head of financial strategy. She became the person in the room who told him not what he wanted to hear, but what was true. And in a world of men and women who competed fiercely for Elias Fontaine's approval, Margaret Osei was remarkable for one simple reason. She did not compete. She did not flatter. She did not perform. She simply showed up, day after day, and did the work. And she was honest with him in a way that almost no one else dared to be. There was a moment 3 years into her tenure when Elias wanted to pursue an acquisition that every instinct told Margaret was a trap. The target company had beautiful numbers on the surface, but she had stayed up for 2 consecutive nights going through their financial history, and she had found it buried deep, hidden behind 3 layers of shell companies, a liability that would have eventually swallowed Elias's entire Eastern Division. She brought it to him in a meeting. Alone, just the 2 of them. She laid the documents on his desk and said, "I know this isn't what you want to hear, but I would rather you be angry at me today than regret this in 2 years." He was angry. He told her she was being overly cautious. He told her she didn't understand the larger strategic picture. He sent her out of his office and did not speak to her for 11 days. And then his lawyers confirmed her findings. He called her back into his office on the 12th day. He looked at her for a long moment. And then he said, simply, "You were right." She did not say, "I told you so." She did not seek gratitude. She said, "I know this company matters to you. I just wanted to protect it." He looked at her, then really looked at her for the second time. And for the second time, he felt that strange, unsettling recognition. And for the second time, he turned away from it. Because Elias Fontaine, for all his intelligence, for all his achievements, was deeply, profoundly afraid of the things he could not control. And the feeling Margaret stirred in him felt dangerously uncontrollable. So he did what powerful, frightened men have done throughout all of human history. He ignored it. Over the following years, as the company grew and his world expanded, Margaret became a constant in his life in ways that were quiet but profound. She was the one who noticed, during a particularly grueling quarter, that he had stopped eating lunch. She began leaving a coffee and a sandwich outside his office door every afternoon with a note that said only, "Fuel." He never thanked her. She never stopped. She was the one who, when his mother fell ill and he was too proud and too busy to visit, quietly arranged for a private nurse to come 3 times a week using her own connections, asking nothing in return, telling no one. Elias didn't find out about this until much, much later. Much too late. She was the one who, when the press turned on him after a particularly public business dispute, wrote him a single text message at 2 in the morning that said, "They're writing about the version of you that makes them money. I know the other version. Don't let them win." He had read it. He had stared at it for a long time. He had not replied. He told himself it was because he was busy. He told himself he would respond tomorrow. Tomorrow is next week. Because that was the cruelest pattern of Elias Fontaine's life, the habit of indefinite postponement with the people who mattered most, while being relentlessly, exhaustingly present for every deal, every dinner, every obligation that could enhance his image or expand his empire. And all the while, Margaret watched. She waited. Not passively. She had her own life, her own friends, her own joys and sorrows. But she watched the man she had come to love with a quiet, steady faithfulness that she herself probably could not have fully explained. It was not the love of delusion. She saw clearly his brilliance and his damage, his generosity and his cruelty, his hunger for connection and his terror of it. She saw him whole, and she loved him whole. All of him, including the parts of him that made him impossible to love. Then came the gala. It was a charity event, the kind Elias attended not out of generosity, but out of strategy, because his PR team told him it was important for his image that he be seen giving. The venue was a restored concert hall downtown, draped in flowers, full of beautiful people in expensive clothes saying expensive things. Elias arrived in a black car, in a black suit, with a woman on his arm, a model named Celeste whom he had been casually seeing for 4 months and already growing bored of. Margaret was there too. She had been invited as a senior executive. She wore a deep burgundy dress that she had bought on sale 3 weeks earlier. She wore her hair down, which was unusual, and when Elias saw her across the room, something shifted in him so suddenly and so completely that he nearly dropped his champagne glass. He had never seen her like that. Outside of conference rooms and boardrooms and the fluorescent-lit corridors of his glass tower, he had never seen her simply as a woman, simply as herself. And she was radiant. Not in the way Celeste was radiant. That was a radiance curated and constructed. Margaret was effortless. She was laughing at something a colleague had said, and the laugh was real, entirely unperformed, and it made the room around her somehow brighter. He wanted to go to her. He started to. And then Celeste slipped her hand into his arm and said something in his ear, and he stopped. And he told himself, again, that there would be time. Time to say hello, time to talk, time, eventually, to say what he wasn't even sure he knew how to say. He didn't go to her that night. He went home with Celeste instead. And 3 weeks later, Margaret handed Marcus an envelope addressed to Elias. Inside was her resignation letter. Clean, professional, warm, and final. She thanked him for the opportunity. She wished the company continued success. She signed it in that neat, unhurried handwriting he had seen on 100 documents and a few precious informal notes. She gave 30 days' notice. She worked them fully, professionally, without drama or emotion displayed publicly. On her last day, she left a small card on Elias's assistant's desk and walked out of the building. Elias read the card that evening. It said, "You built something remarkable here. I was grateful to be a small part of it. Take care of yourself, Elias. Not the company, yourself. I always thought that was more important anyway." He sat with that card for a long time. He told himself it was fine. He told himself people leave. He told himself he would send flowers, maybe, or write a brief congratulatory note. He told himself the hollow feeling in his chest was just fatigue. He sent nothing. Then months became a year. Celeste was gone. That relationship had evaporated as predictably as all the others before it. Another woman came and went. And another. And Elias, now 43, found himself at a peculiar and unsettling crossroads that wealth does not protect you from and success does not solve. He found himself wondering, in rare, quiet moments, what he had actually built his life for. He found himself, in his 42nd floor office, looking out at the city below and feeling not power, not pride, but a strange and deepening emptiness. He began to think about Margaret, not obsessively at first, casually. The way you think about a song you can't quite place something at the edge of your memory, half familiar, pulling. He found himself remembering small things. The sandwich outside his door, the text message at 2 in the morning, the burgundy dress, the way she had said, "I would rather you be angry at me today," the way she had said, "I know the other version." He asked Marcus, offhandedly, if he knew what Margaret was doing these days. Marcus said he had heard she had started her own financial consulting firm, that it was doing well. Elias nodded. He said, "Good for her." He meant it. But the thought didn't leave him. It was another 6 months before the real unraveling began. And it began, as the most consequential moments of life often do, not with a dramatic event, but with a quiet one. A Sunday afternoon. Elias was at his country house, alone, which happened more and more frequently. He was going through an old storage room. He was having the house renovated, and there were boxes to sort. And in one of those boxes, tucked between old contracts and newspaper clippings about his early business wins, he found something that stopped him completely. It was a photograph from an employee picnic, perhaps 6 years earlier. He was in the center, laughing at something, the sun behind him, looking exactly as confident and untouchable as he always looked in photographs. And there, standing slightly to his left, not touching him, not looking at the camera, was Margaret. She was looking at him, just looking at him, with an expression so openly, nakedly tender that he felt, staring at that photograph on a Sunday afternoon in an empty house, the ground shifted beneath his feet. He had never seen that expression before. Or rather, he had never looked closely enough to see it. How many times had she looked at him like that? How many times had that expression been on her face, in rooms he was moving through too quickly, in moments he was too distracted to feel? How many times had love been standing right beside him while he was busy looking somewhere else? He sat down on the floor of that storage room with that photograph in his hands, and he did something he had not done since he was a child. He wept. He did not fully understand yet why he was weeping, but his body knew something his mind was only beginning to understand. His body knew the weight of what he had walked past. His body knew the terrible mathematics of time, the irrevocability of years spent looking away from the right person toward the wrong things. He made inquiries. Carefully. He found her business address. He found that her consulting firm now had 7 employees and clients across 2 continents. He found, through a mutual acquaintance, that she was well, that she seemed happy, that she was, the acquaintance mentioned with a smile that cut Elias without the acquaintance knowing it, engaged to be married. Engaged. He sat with that word like a man sits with a diagnosis he was told was coming but wasn't ready to hear. He told himself it was fine. He told himself it was good. He told himself he had no right to feel what he was feeling, because he had made his choices and she had made hers, and this was how life worked. He told himself all of these rational, reasonable things, and none of them made the slightest difference to the ragged, irreversible grief that had taken up residence in his chest. He began to ask people who knew her what she had been like in those years. He reached out to a former colleague, a woman named Patricia, who had worked alongside Margaret for years. They met for coffee, and Elias asked questions he disguised as casual curiosity, and Patricia, who was kind but not blind, saw straight through him and answered honestly anyway. And that is when the real revelations came. That is when the story that Elias thought he already knew was replaced by the story that was actually true. Patricia told him about the nurse. She told him how Marguerite, 2 years into working for him, had learned through an offhand comment from his mother's doctor, a doctor she knew socially, that Elias's mother's health was declining and that she was being left largely to manage it alone. Elias was, at the time, in the middle of a major company expansion. He had visited his mother 3 times in 8 months. Patricia told Elias that Margaret had quietly coordinated private nursing care, home meal delivery, partly through small budget lines she had carefully rerouted in ways that would never appear on any report Elias would see. "She never told you," Patricia said. It was not a question. Elias shook his head. He could not speak. Patricia told him about the shareholder meeting, for years ago, when a hostile investor group had assembled enough support to push for a vote of no confidence in Elias's leadership. The night before that meeting, Margaret had worked without stopping for 19 hours, calling board members, preparing counterproposals, researching leverage points. She had not been asked to do it. No one had assigned it to her. She had simply understood what the vote would mean for him, personally, not just professionally, how it would devastate a man whose entire identity was built on never being left behind, never being abandoned, never being told he was not enough. She had understood this about him better than anyone, and she had fought for him while he slept. Did he know? Elias found himself asking, as though he were asking about someone else, as though the man in the story was not him. She made sure he didn't, Patricia said. She told those of us who knew not to mention it. She said, he doesn't need to know who helped him. He just needs to win. He drove home from that coffee in silence. He sat in his driveway for 40 minutes because he could not bring himself to go inside. He kept thinking about the photograph. He kept thinking about the expression on her face. He kept thinking for 19 hours. 14 months. Sandwiches. A text message at 2 in the morning. He thought about all the times he had spoken to her sharply when he was under pressure. All the times he had dismissed her concerns with an impatience that he would never have shown to the men in the room. All the times he had looked through her because she was not loud, because she was not performing, because her form of devotion was the quiet, daily kind that arrogance mistakes for weakness and pride mistakes for convenience. He thought about the gala, the burgundy dress, the moment he had started to go to her and turned away. He thought about what would have happened if he hadn't turned away. He thought about this for a long, long time. He eventually reached out to her. He had debated it for weeks whether it was his right, whether it would be fair to her, whether he was reaching out for her sake or purely and selfishly for his own. He decided, in the end, that he needed to say something not because it would change anything he knew it would change nothing, but because the truth deserved to be spoken, because she deserved to hear it from him, in his own words, without conditions or expectations. He wrote her a letter, not an email, a handwritten letter, which took him 4 drafts and 2 full days to complete. He told her that he had been thinking about her. He told her he had learned things about what she had done for him, for his mother, for his company that he had not known, and that had changed how he understood his own past. He told her that he had spent a long time believing that the greatest testimony to his life was the empire he had built, and that he was slowly, painfully understanding that the greatest thing that had ever happened to him was a woman who had chosen to see him clearly and stay anyway, and whom he had been too blind, too proud, and too afraid to value in time. He told her he was not writing to ask for anything. He was writing because she deserved to know she had not been invisible, that she had been seen. Too late, perhaps, but fully. She replied 2 weeks later. Her reply was short. It was gracious and warm in the way that only truly good people can be gracious and warm with someone who has hurt them. She thanked him for the letter. She told him that she had never regretted the time she had given to him or his company. She told him that she hoped he was well. She told him that she was happy, genuinely happy, and that she wished the same for him. She did not ask to see him. She did not leave a door open. She closed it gently, warmly, and with complete dignity. And Elias Fontaine, who had negotiated billion-dollar contracts and stared down the most formidable opponents in the business world, had no response to the gentle, gracious closing of that door. He held her letter in his hands the way you hold something you know you are about to lose forever. He read it until he could not read it anymore. And then he put it carefully away, not in a drawer, not in a file, but in the same box where he kept the photograph. He attended her wedding. He was not invited. Of course he was not invited. But someone posted photographs, the way people post photographs now, and he saw them on a quiet Thursday evening on his phone. She was wearing white. She was laughing. The man beside her was looking at her with an expression that Elias recognized, because it was the same expression that was on her face in that photograph from 6 years ago, the one he had found in the storage room, the one that had cracked him open. The man beside her was looking at her the way she had looked at Elias. That expression, given now to a man who had the wisdom to receive it. Elias put his phone face down on the table and looked at the ceiling of his penthouse for a very long time. There is a particular kind of grief that does not arrive with noise. It does not shatter things. It does not announce itself at the door. It comes quietly, in the small hours, when the city outside is dark and all the people who admire you and fear you and want things from you are asleep. It comes, and it sits beside you on your expensive furniture in your extraordinary apartment at the top of the world, and it asks you, in a voice that is somehow both a whisper and deafening, what exactly it is that you have built, and whether you built it with your whole self or only the part of yourself you were not afraid of. Elias Fontaine, in the years that followed, changed. Not in the dramatic Hollywood sense. There was no sudden transformation, no grand gesture, no tearful public redemption. But he changed in the quiet ways that matter. He called his mother more. He visited her more. He sat with her in her kitchen and let her talk about ordinary things without checking his phone. He began to pay attention to the people around him in ways he never had before, not the powerful people, not the useful people, but the ones who simply showed up, the ones who were consistent, the ones who told him the truth. He became, gradually and imperfectly, a man who understood the value of things before they were gone. He was not fully healed. Grief of this kind does not heal entirely, because it is not an injury, it is knowledge. It is the knowledge of what you were capable of and what you chose instead. You carry that knowledge. You live with it. You let it, if you are wise enough and humble enough, make you better. He was 51 years old when he gave his first major interview that had nothing to do with business. A journalist asked him what the most important lesson of his life had been. He was quiet for a moment. The journalist waited. And then Elias said something that neither of them had prepared for. He said, "I spent the first half of my life building things. Walls mostly. I called them achievements. I called them success. But they were walls. And the one person who was genuinely trying to reach me, I mistook her patience for passivity, and her kindness for weakness, and her presence for permanence. I thought that because she was always there, she would always be there. I was wrong. And the most important thing I have ever learned is this. Not everyone who is gentle is powerless. Not everyone who stays is staying forever. And love, real love, the quiet kind, the daily kind, the kind that doesn't ask to be noticed. That love is rarer than anything I have ever found on a balance sheet, rarer than anything I have ever negotiated for, and infinitely more valuable." The journalist said nothing for a moment, and then she asked if she could print that. Elias said yes. He said he hoped she would, because somewhere out there, he thought somewhere, right now, there is a person doing for someone else what Margaret did for him. There is a person leaving sandwiches outside a door and sending messages at 2 in the morning and fighting for someone in the dark without asking for credit. There is a person whose love is so steady and so real that the person receiving it has confused its constancy for granted, has walked past it every day without feeling its weight. Maybe that person is you. Maybe the one who truly loves you is not the one who shouts it from a stage. Maybe it is the one who shows up quietly on a Tuesday when you're struggling. Maybe it is the one who tells you the truth when it costs them something. Maybe it is the one who fights for you in the dark and never tells you they did. Pay attention. Don't wait for the storage room. Don't wait for the photograph. Don't wait for Thursday evening when you put your phone face down on a table and look at the ceiling and understand, fully and finally and too late, what was standing right beside you all along. Some doors, when they close, close gently, warmly, with complete dignity, and they do not open again. This is the story of Elias Fontaine, and the woman he did not see in time. Let her story change the way you see the people beside you, before it's too late.